Once again, we'll be back. We are continuing MCQ questions about muscle physiology. Consider to subscribe and like the YouTube channel. Consider to click the bell icon so that you can always receive notification about our new and current videos. Now we are continuing with nerve muscle physiology questions, and now we are going to continue and look at the next question. Previously we looked at the resting membrane potential of nerve muscle fiber. We are looking at part 2. Now that one we had already concluded that it's none of the above, because resting membrane potential is usually negative millivolts, and it is negative 70 millivolts, and it is brought about as a result of outward flow of calcium ions, not inward flow, and it is due to it is not basically due to diffusion of extracellular proteins. It is not a passive process, it is an active process because it involves the sodium, potassium, ATPase pump. Now we can go ahead and look at the number 216 that says, concerning isoelectric contractions, isometric and isotonic muscle contractions. Good. A. Isometric contractions does not require sliding of the actin filaments. B. During isometric contractions, load is moved and work is done. C. During isotonic contractions, greater amount of energy is required. D. During isotonic contractions, muscle length is not changed. E. Isometric contractions, in isometric contractions, the series and parallel elastic elements are not stretched. Let's think about the most correct answer for 216. The most correct answer is C. During isotonic contractions, a greater amount of energy is required. Now, why? Because when you look at isotonic contractions is a type of contraction whereby we see the muscle is contracting but with no change or very little change in tension. But the muscle usually contracts and shows different changes in length of the muscle. It shows changes which can either be concentric to show increase in length, or eccentric, which shows decrease in length. The muscle is doing work. Work is done. So doing work requires too much energy, more than in isometric contraction. In isometric contraction, the muscle is simply becoming tense. It is having tension, but it's not doing work. Why? Because it is neither shortening nor increasing in length. That is isometric contractions. Take an example, isotonic contractions. An example that we can give is isotonic contraction. An example we can give is using the biceps. When you are raising an object using the biceps, a heavy object, that is concentric. When you're lowering it slowly, that is eccentric. But when you're pushing against the wall, then that is isometric. Good. So the most correct answer is D. Sorry, the most correct answer that we have said is C. C is the most correct answer, and all the others are not correct because A is not correct. So the most correct answer here that we have is C. C is the most correct answer. A is wrong. Both of them show sliding of actin filaments. And then it is not correct to say isometric contraction, load is moved and work is done. That is not correct. It is in isotonic. It is not correct to say during isotonic contractions, the muscle length is not changed. It is changed. Good. Let's go ahead and look at our next question, which says the all or nothing law. The all or nothing law states that the threshold stimulus produced by an impulse produces an impulse which A is weaker than that produced by a stronger stimulus. B is propagated only partially along the cell membrane. C does not need any energy. C is not different from that produced by a stronger threshold. Now, the all or nothing rule simply states that the size of an action potential is independent of the size of the stimulus. Now, our most correct answer would be yes. Okay, the correct answer is D. The most correct answer is D. Is not different from that produced by a stronger stimulus. It remains fixed. The size of an action potential remains fixed, does not change. You know very well that as a muscle is exposed to increasing size of stimulus, it is only threshold stimulus that will cause formation of an action potential. But even when you increase stimulus more than the threshold value, the action potential size will remain the same. What will change simply is the interval between action potentials. The interval will be smaller due to increased strength of the stimulus. The other alternatives are not correct. Now, we can go ahead and look at the next objective. Says, during muscle contraction, all the following is true except A. The binding sites of actin filaments are activated by calcium ions. B. The walk-along theory of contraction assumes that the sliding actin continues as long as calcium is still attached to the troponin. C. The detachment of myosin heads from the actin needs binding of an ATP molecule. D. Transverse tubules become filled with intracellular fluid. The correct answer here is D. Transverse tubules. The correct answer is D. Transverse tubules become filled with intracellular fluid. It is not correct. So, transverse tubules are usually filled with the extracellular fluid. They are simply invaginations of the sarcoplasmic of the sarcolemma. The other are very correct concerning skeletal muscle contractions. But the transverse tubules are usually filled with intracellular with extracellular fluid, and they are very important for the rapid spread of the action potential into the muscle fiber. All the following statements are correct except during impulse propagation, the area of current sink causes flow of current, which increases the polarity of the membrane ahead. With full or complete tetanus, mechanical record shows no wave, while electric record shows a series of separate waves. Acetylcholine receptors in a motor end plate are present in the postsynaptic membrane. D. The equilibrium potential can be calculated from Nast potential and is negative 70 millivolts for chloride, negative 90 millivolts for potassium, and positive 60 millivolts for sodium, respectively. So we're looking out for the most correct answer, and the most correct answer is A. The most correct answer is A. Why? Because when you say it is the wrong one, it is the old man out. During impulse propagation, the area of current sink causes flow of current in which increases the polarity of the membrane ahead. Instead, what usually happens is decrease in polarity of the membrane ahead, and that is what we basically call depolarization, because impulses are usually transmitted as a wave of depolarization. So the area ahead is usually depolarized, loss of polarity. But here they are saying increase in polarity. Increase in polarity is usually happening when we do repolarization, where the membrane gains its polarity. So, or hyperpolarization. The rest are correct concerning concerning nerves. So the answer here is A. The others are all correct except A. So A is the most correct alternative for our objective. About skeletal muscles, all the following is true except during fatigue, the tension is developed and work done is diminished due to reduction in ATP formation. B. The contracture due to myophosphatase activity occurs as a result of inability of the muscle to utilize glycogen and produce ATP. C. Athletes are capable of greater exertion without much lactic acid production. D. There are two types of skeletal muscle fibers, the red and which contract faster and fatigues faster and fatigues more rapidly than the pale ones. Good. So we have those alternatives ahead of us and we are supposed to choose the wrong alternative. It is correct that fatigue is brought about by diminished ATP production. It is true that mcqs disease occurs due to inability of the muscle to use glycogen since it is deficient in myophosphatase. That is correct as well. Athletes are capable of greater exertion without much lactic acid, which is also correct. The long answer is D. There are two types of muscle fibers, the red and which contracts faster and fatigues more. The reverse is true. It is the pale that contract faster and fatigue more rapidly than the red ones. Because yes, the pale ones are usually the ones called the fast twitch muscles or fast oxidation muscles. We can go ahead and look at our next. So the most correct answer there is D. We can go ahead and look at the next question, which says the activity of skeletal muscles. All the following are true except hypertrophy develops as a result of forced or repeated contractions. The function of transverse tubules, part B. The function of transverse tubules is rapid transmission of an action potential from the cell membrane to the inside of the muscle fiber. C. During spike potential, the muscle excitability is normal. D. Acetylcholine is released at the MEP is rapidly hydrolyzed by acetylcholinesterase. So what is the wrong answer? Okay. What is the wrong answer? The wrong answer is basically C. During spike potential, the muscle excitability is normal. That is our alternative, which is wrong. It is the wrong thing, but it is the answer for this question. At excitability, at peak potential, the excitability of the muscle is far much reduced. It's not normal. In fact, it is almost zero. At peak potential, from peak potential up to the time when the membrane potential has been restored back to, has been repolarized, that one we call it refractory period, and the muscle is in the excitability is lower. The other alternatives are correct, that acetylcholine is usually hydrolyzed rapidly by acetylcholinesterase. The transverse tubules are very important when it comes to spreading action potentials from the cell membrane to the inside of the fiber, and hypertrophy develops as a result of post-repeated contractions, and that is the basis of gym, people going to the gym. So the most correct answer for that question is C. Now we go ahead and look at about the properties of various types of muscles. A. Tetanus of the type seen in skeletal muscles may occur in heart. C. The excitation coupling is more rapid in smooth muscles than in skeletal muscles. C. Anisotropic Isometric contraction means a contraction without shortening. D. Acetylcholine is not released at the MEP during rest. E. Urea blocks the neurotransmitter neuromuscular transmission by preventing release of acetylcholine from the terminal. We are looking out for the correct statement. Okay. We are on 222. Okay, the most correct answer is an isometric contraction means contraction without shortening. That is the most correct. The others are all wrong. While urea is usually an analog of acetylcholine, so it binds to the nicotinic receptors and prevents binding of acetylcholine. Then when you look at fatigue never occurs in cardiac muscles. Excitation coupling is more rapid in smooth muscles than in skeletal muscles. It's not correct as well. And it is not correct that MEP, acetylcholine is not released at MEP during muscle rest, because we usually say that muscles usually have a tone even at rest. So the most correct answer here is C, our correct alternative. You can go ahead and look at 223, which says in skeletal muscles, the initiation of contraction occurs by binding of calcium ions to troponin. B. The action potential follows work done. C. The one-way conduction at the MEP is due to location of the chemical mediators acetylcholine in the nerve terminal. D. Fatigue has no relation to deficiency of blood supply. E. Fatigue sets in after fatigue occurs in the muscles. Okay, the most correct answer is C. The one-way conduction of the MEP is due to the location of the chemical mediator acetylcholine. One-way conduction is ensured by that fact that usually the neurotransmitter substance is located within the presynaptic knob and the receptors are in the postsynaptic knob, and that ensures unidirectional flow. And calcium ions do not bind to tropomyosin, so the correct answer is C. Calcium ions bind to troponin. C. Action potentials follow the work done. That is not correct. Fatigue has no relation with deficiency of blood flow. That is not correct as well, because fatigue is related to shortage of oxygen. So that means blood flow is part. Fatigue sets in after fatigue occurs in nerves. That's not correct as well. So the correct answer for that question is C. About nerve excitability. During rest, the nerve membrane is depolarized. B. Chronox means the intensity of the stimulus that produces a response. C. An electronic response decreases the membrane potential and increases the nerve excitability. D. Potassium ion is the least permeable cation through the nerve membrane. E. The resting membrane potential becomes less negative if the potassium ion concentration increases outside. Potassium ion concentration outside the membrane is doubled. What is the most correct answer? The most correct answer is E. The resting membrane potential becomes less negative if the potassium ion concentration outside the membrane becomes doubled. Why? Because potassium ions are the outflux of potassium ions will be reduced due to the fact that now we have a lot outside. So if we have a lot of potassium ions outside, that means that we shall have less diffusion of potassium ions outside, because potassium ions are moving through the potassium leaky channels along a diffusion gradient. So if less will move out, that means the inside of the membrane will become a little bit less negative than the normal resting membrane potential. It is not correct, so the correct answer is C. D is not correct because the resting membrane is much more permeable to potassium ions. The other alternatives are not correct. All the following about the electric activity in a muscle is correct except A. The self-propagating nerve impulse is due to successive depolarization to the firing level of the membrane ahead of the action potential. B. The resting potential keeps constant after blocking the sodium pump. C. The after hyperpolarization phase is the last phase of an action potential. D. Repolarization is initiated by potassium ion efflux. Now the other one is the after depolarization phase, the action potential is due to slow calcium efflux. The after depolarization phase of action potential is due to slow potassium ion efflux. We are choosing the following are the following about electric activity in nerves is correct except, so we're looking up for the wrong answer. Our wrong answer is B. The resting potential keeps constant after blocking sodium potassium pump. We know sodium potassium pump is very important when it comes to establishment of the resting membrane potential. So if you block it, that means the resting membrane potential will be established, but it will have to be different. The other are correct alternatives. Repolarization is brought about by efflux of potassium ions, and that usually happens after the action potential. And it is true that after hyperpolarization phase is the last phase of the action potential. It is as well correct that self-propagating nerve impulses is due to successful depolarization to a firing level of a nerve of a membrane ahead of the action potential. Now we can go ahead and, so the most correct answer here is we have agreed that it is B. B is the most correct answer. We can go ahead and look at the next question about the blocking of conduction in nerve fibers. It can be induced by catalytic electronic potential. B. The B. Nerve fibers are most sensitive to pressure. C. Nerve fibers are most sensitive to local anesthesia. It is enhanced by increasing calcium concentration in the extracellular fluid. E. The C nerve fibers are most sensitive to hypoxia. We are looking out for the correct answer. The most correct answer for 226 is D. That is to say, blocking is enhanced by increasing the calcium ion concentration in the extracellular fluid. When you increase extracellular fluid concentration, you will be increasing the tendency of formation of action potential. That will decrease the rate of that will block the nerve. The others are not correct. The most nerve fiber that is most sensitive to pressure is A, not B. And the one that is most sensitive to local anesthesia is B. C is not correct. E is not correct as well. Now, so the most correct answer here that we can give is D. D is the most correct answer for 226. During skeletal muscle contraction, A band remains constant. C, the Z line moves further apart. B, the I band is elongated. D, the H zone becomes wider. Now, what is the most correct alternative? We all know that during skeletal muscle contraction, as the actin filaments slide against the stationary myosin filaments, we usually know that. So the correct answer here for number 227 is A. The A band remains constant. It is not correct that the Z line move further apart. Rather, the Z lines usually move closer to each other. Tropomyosin remains in the place. It is not true. Tropomyosin is usually displaced as a result of binding of calcium ions to troponin C. That causes tropomyosin to undergo a conformational change, and that allows it to move away. The I band is elongated. I band is that space between the myo. It is that region which is only having actin filament, and it exists between the myosin in one sarcomere and the myosin in another neighboring sarcomere. The H zone is usually that region in between on either sides of the M line, and it diminishes. It does not become wider, but it diminishes as a result of the overlapping of the actin filaments. So here the most correct answer is A. The others are all not correct. 228. Spontaneous activity of the playing muscles occurs because the sarcoplasmic reticulum is weakly developed. B. Absence of troponin. C. Membrane potential has no stable value. D. Of nervous activity. E. The actin and myosin filaments are randomly arranged. E. The duration of an action potential is 10 to 15 microseconds. Now, spontaneous activity is simply the muscle contracting without excitation from the central nervous system, some kind of myogenic stimulation. We know playing muscles, especially the unitary smooth muscles, show some kind of myogenicity along with cardiac muscles. Unitary skeletal muscles show some kind of slow calcium waves at rest. Those slow calcium waves tend to make the resting membrane potential unstable. So they have what they call the calcium leaky channels, which allow calcium to leak into the sarcoplasm, and that allows the membrane potential to keep on changing. Sometimes it even raises the membrane potential greater than the threshold potential, and that causes formation of small spike potentials in the smooth muscle. And this explains why smooth muscles can contract even without nervous. Some smooth muscles, especially the smooth muscles of the GIT, can contract even when there is no nervous impulse present because of the slow calcium waves. Smooth muscles are so that is the most correct answer here is C. The others are not correct. Let us go ahead and look at number 229. Which of the following occurs in playing muscles but not in skeletal muscles? A. Sliding mechanism of contraction. B. Cholinergic innervation. C. Myogenic action potential. D. Breakdown of ATP. E. Myogenic rhythmicity. From our previous question, we have seen that smooth muscles exhibit myogenic rhythmicity. in a way that they can contract in the absence of the nerve impulse. Usually we know that they are stimulated by the CNS, by the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system, but they can still contract even in the absence of the impulses from the CNS. So they are myogenic, they have some rhythmicity, they have some pacemaker activity as observed in the cardiac muscle, and that distinguishes them from the skeletal muscles. But the others do not distinguish them because they are common to all skeletal muscles. The most correct answer here is E. The absolute 230, the absolute refractory period, A, is due to hyperpolarization. B, refers to a normal or increased excitability state. C, follows the negative after potential. D, is prolonged when potassium efflux is delayed. E, is equal in skeletal and cardiac muscle. The most correct answer here is D. The most correct answer is D. Is prolonged when potassium efflux is delayed. Remember, for absolute refractory period to end, it ends at that point when the curve, the membrane potential, finally hits the normal resting membrane potential as it is undergoing repolarization from. Usually we know that absolute refractory period is a period of time between the action potential. When you look at that graph for action potential, for the potential difference across a neuron when it is conducting a nerve impulse. When you look at it carefully, from the peak to that point when that line of potential difference crosses the I would call it the x-intercept. That x-intercept, between the peak and the x-intercept, that is what we call the absolute refractory period, where the nerve is completely inexcitable. Then after the x-intercept, then the lower point, that is hyperpolarization. So between hyperpolarization and finally back to normal resting membrane potential, that one there is simply relative refractory period. And the absolute refractory period is simply brought about as a result of the closure of the inactivation sodium inactivation gates. When they have completely closed, that means that you cannot excite the nerve fiber, even when you provide a very strong stimulus. But at least in relative refractory period, you can excite if you provide the nerve with stimulus that is relatively stronger than the normal the normal threshold stimulus. So the most correct answer there is D. When the potassium ions delay to go out, that means that we shall have a longer refractory period. We can so the answer is D. Number 231, about nerve impulses. All the following are correct except A. They can be conducted in both directions by the body. The conduction is mainly, but in the body, the conduction is mainly orthodromic and sometimes antidromic. B. They are conducted passively, like in the metal. We are looking out for something that is not true. Good. Their conduction is an active self-propagating process associated with reversal of polarity across the nerve cell. D. They are characterized by being constant in amplitude and velocity for certain nerve fibers. E. There is saltatory conduction in myelinated fibers, which is much faster than the conduction in non-myelinated fibers. So the most correct answer here is B. B is the most correct answer in such a question. The other alternatives are correct. It is correct that nerve impulses can be conducted in either direction, though antidromic is usually experimental. Take an example. When a nerve axon is excited midway, it can either go towards to the terminal or towards the cell body. That is towards the cell body, that is antidromic. Towards the nerve terminal, that is orthodromic. But antidromic is purely experimental and does not happen in the in the body. In the body, what usually happens is from the cell body to the terminals, because of the location of the neurotransmitter substances in the presynaptic knob and the presence of the receptors at the postsynaptic knob, and the fact that we usually see the previous area that has been depolarized, as the next region is being depolarized, the previous area undergoes repolarization. So it shows some kind of refractory period. So you cannot excite the previous area. The other alternatives are all correct. The other alternatives are all correct except for B. It is not a passive process, it is an active process. Okay. We can go to 232. The action potential in the action potential, all the following is true except the firing level is the level at which the spike potential begins. The rapid repolarization is due to increase in the potassium and permeability. C. The duration of isoelectric interval, what they call the latent period, is inversely proportional to the speed of conduction. D. Decreasing extracellular sodium concentration reduces the size of an action potential. E. Absolute refractory period is the period from firing level until refractory period. We are choosing the incorrect statement for 232. Okay, and the incorrect statement is E. The absolute refractory period. We saw previously that the absolute refractory period is not between the firing level. Firing level is like the threshold level. It's not true. Absolute refractory period begins that point where we're having a peak, that action potential, to the point where we have the x-intercept, where we have crossed the x-axis. That is absolute refractory period. But according to E, they are saying it is between firing level, that point where we have a value, intensity at least higher than the threshold, or a generator potential, a graded potential being higher than the threshold, then firing an action potential. During that point, that is not the absolute refractory period. That is, absolute refractory period begins from the peak action potential up to the point where we have x-intercept. Okay, so the most correct answer, all the above are correct. Firing level is the level at which the spike potential begins. B. Rapid repolarization is due to increased potassium ion permeability, and C is as well correct. D is as well correct. Now, so the correct answer for that 232 is the most correct answer. The correct answer is E, which is wrong. Now, we can go ahead and look at 233. Now, when you look at 233, they say in steady state, all the following ratios of electrolytes in the ECF and ICF components, respectively, are true except A. Potassium 1 to 25 to 1 to 27, sodium 12 to 1. C. Sodium 1 to 1. D. Chloride 30 to 1. Organic anions 0 to 22. We are choosing the incorrect statement, and the incorrect statement is C. C is the incorrect statement. Sodium is not 1 to 1. Sodium is 12